Welcome to Alcott Stories, where love, passion, and unforgettable journeys unfold. Tonight, we invite you to experience a love that defied all odds, where power, betrayal, and a love that seemed impossible collided in the most unexpected ways. A love so fierce it shook two hearts to their very core. Get ready to dive deep into the world of passion, tears, and fiery emotions that will leave you breathless. Will love conquer all, or will the scars of the past tear them apart forever? Stay with us as we unravel a story that will make you believe in second chances and the kind of love worth fighting for. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want more heart-wrenching, passionate stories that keep you guessing, ready to uncover the secrets. Now, sit back, relax, and let your heart race as you discover what happens when two souls, lost and torn apart, are bound by a love they can't forget. The glass doors of Blackstone Enterprises gleamed under the golden sunlight as Amara Hayes stepped inside, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. Dressed in an elegant but professional pencil skirt and a silk blouse that hugged her curves, she radiated a quiet, unshakable confidence. Her deep brown skin glowed against the soft office lighting, her curly hair cascading past her shoulders, and her honey-colored eyes held a spark of fire, one that refused to be dimmed by anyone. She had worked too hard to get here, and no man, no matter how powerful or intimidating, was going to shake her. But that was before she met Leonard Leo Blackstone. The first time she saw him, she felt her breath hitch. He was unlike any man she had ever encountered. Tall and exuding an air of dominance, Leo Blackstone was dangerously handsome, the kind of man who could make women forget their own names. His broad shoulders filled out his custom-tailored black suit like he was born to rule. His icy blue eyes, cold and unreadable, held a piercing sharpness, and his chiseled jawline gave him a cruel beauty. But it wasn't just his looks that struck her, it was the command in his presence. He didn't just walk into a room, he owned it. And when he spoke, his deep, velvety voice sent a strange heat curling through her spine. Unfortunately, the first words he directed at her weren't exactly welcoming. "You're late." Amara blinked, taken aback. She wasn't late. She had arrived just 10 minutes early. "Excuse me." She shot back, tilting her chin up. Leo's lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer, as if he was already unimpressed by her existence. "Let me guess, you're another overconfident employee who thinks she's special." His tone was dismissive, laced with arrogance. Amara's jaw clenched. Oh, hell no. She had dealt with difficult bosses before, but this man, he was something else entirely. He had the ability to make her blood boil and her pulse race, and not in the way she wanted. She squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "Let me guess," she countered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're another rich CEO who thinks he's God's gift to the world." A dangerous silence stretched between them. For the first time, Leo's icy gaze darkened. Something dangerous flickering beneath the surface. A slow, almost amused smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Interesting," he murmured, stepping closer. "You've got a mouth on you." Amara refused to back down, though her heart pounded. "I use it when necessary," she said smoothly. Leo chuckled, a low, almost sinister sound that sent a strange shiver down her spine. "I like challenges, Ms. Hayes. Let's see how long you last." With that, he turned on his heel, leaving Amara standing there fuming. Who the hell did he think he was? Days turned into weeks, and every interaction between them was like a battle of fire and ice. Leo challenged her constantly, pushing her, questioning her every move, making her feel like she had to prove herself, again and again. But Amara, she refused to break. She held his gaze. When others looked away, she spoke her mind. When others stayed silent. And even though she hated to admit it, there was something about the way he looked at her that made her stomach flutter. She'd catch him watching her from across the office, his blue eyes dark, intense, studying her as if he was trying to figure her out. And sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she saw something else in his gaze, something dangerous, something forbidden. But then he would shut it down, returning to his usual cold arrogance, pretending she was just another employee. Still, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. And no matter how hard Amara tried to ignore it, something about Leonard Blackstone pulled her in, making her feel like she was playing with fire. A fire she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. Days turned into weeks, and Amara's war with Leo Blackstone continued. She told herself she hated him, his arrogance, his cold stares, the way he always acted like he was above everyone. But the problem? Her body refused to believe the lie, because every time he was near, her pulse raced. Every time he spoke, that deep, commanding voice sent chills skittering down her spine. Every time he touched her, even by accident, her skin burned where his fingers brushed. And the worst part, he knew it. It started with late nights in his office. Amara had taken on a massive project, and Leo, for some reason, insisted on overseeing it personally. She told herself it was purely professional, that his presence was nothing but a nuisance. But as the hours stretched into the night, the office fell into a strange silence, just the sound of her typing, the occasional click of his pen, and he with the heavy awareness lingering between them. It was suffocating, yet somehow addicting. She'd catch him watching her from across the room, his gaze like a storm waiting to break. His sharp blue eyes would trace the curve of her neck, the way she bit her lip when she concentrated, the way her blouse clung to her skin in the soft glow of the office lights. And when she'd look up and meet his gaze, he wouldn't look away. One evening, it happened. The moment that changed everything. She had been reviewing a contract, seated at the edge of his massive mahogany desk, her fingers flipping through the pages. Leo stood beside her, his cologne, a dangerous mix of musk and expensive whiskey, filling her senses. Too close. Way too close. She forced herself to focus, to ignore the way his arm brushed against hers, the way his breath fanned against her temple whenever he leaned in. But then she felt it, his stare. Amara slowly turned her head and her breath hitched. He wasn't looking at the contract. He wasn't looking at her hands. He was staring at her lips. A thick silence filled the space between them. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The air became hot, suffocating, thick with something unspoken. She should have moved. She should have said something. But she didn't, because at that moment, all she could think about was how badly she wanted him to close the distance. Leo's hand lifted slightly, as if he was about to touch her, his fingers brushing against hers, just barely. A fleeting whisper of skin against skin. A soft gasp escaped her lips at the contact. The world tilted. He was going to kiss her. She could feel it. His breath was uneven now, his jaw clenched like he was at war with himself. And just when she thought he'd finally give in to whatever was between them, He stepped and back, as if she burned him. His expression hardened instantly, eyes turning cold, distant, unreadable. "This can't happen," he murmured, his voice like steel. Amara felt as if someone had just thrown ice water over her body. She blinked, her throat suddenly tight. What?" She stammered, still dizzy from whatever had just transpired. "Forget this," Leo said, his face void of emotion now. "Forget it ever happened." He turned away, dismissing her, like she meant nothing. And for the first time since she met him, it hurt. Because deep down, she knew. Leo Blackstone wanted her. But for some reason, he refused to let himself have her. The tension between them had been building for weeks. A wildfire waiting for the right spark to explode into an uncontrollable blaze. And tonight, that moment had finally come. Amara stormed down the hallway of Blackstone Enterprises, her heart pounding with fury. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. She shoved open the door to Leo Blackstone's office. Without knocking, her breath ragged from anger, Leo looked up from his desk, his ice-blue eyes narrowing the second he saw her. He was seated in his expensive leather chair, his sleeves rolled up, exposing the veins that ran along his forearms, his hands clasped together as if he had been expecting her. "You've crossed the line, Blackstone." Her voice was like a whip, slicing through the heavy silence. Leo leaned back, his gaze steady, unaffected, arrogant, infuriating. "I have no idea what you're talking about." That smug tone, that damned indifference. Amara threw the contract onto his desk, her brown eyes burning with rage. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. You changed my proposal last minute, after I spent weeks perfecting it. You made me look like a fool in front of the entire board." Leo didn't even flinch. If anything, he looked amused. "That's because it needed improvement," he said, his voice low, smooth, like a predator toying with its prey. Amara's fists clenched. "You're impossible!" she snapped. Leo pushed himself up from his chair, moving slowly, deliberately, until he was standing right in front of her. His towering frame loomed over her, his presence overpowering. "And you're reckless." His voice was softer now, but there was something dark beneath it. Amara's breath hitched. She hated how her body reacted to him, how the heat in his eyes made her knees feel weak. She should have turned away, she should have stormed out, but instead, she stood her ground. "You enjoy pushing me, don't you?" she challenged, her voice trembling from something that had nothing to do with anger. Leo's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. "Maybe." She sucked in a breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The air between them was suffocating, thick with something forbidden, something dangerous. And then he moved, before she could process what was happening. Leo's hands were on her waist, pulling her against him, his grip firm, unyielding. Their bodies collided, heat crashing through her like a tidal wave. "You drive me insane, Amara." His voice was rough, strained, as if he had been fighting this moment for far too long. Amara barely had a second to react before his lips crashed against hers. The world tilted. It wasn't a soft, hesitant kiss. It was raw, wild, full of frustration and longing. His mouth moved against hers like he was starving, like he had been holding back for too long, and finally gave in. A soft moan escaped her lips, and he groaned in response, his fingers tightening on her waist as he lifted her slightly onto his desk. Her hands found his hair, tugging at the soft strands as his tongue traced along the seam of her lips, demanding entrance. She gave in. God, she gave in. The taste of him, whiskey and danger, made her head spin. Leo's hands slid lower, gripping her hips, pulling her closer, deeper, as if he wanted to consume her. Her heart hammered as his mouth moved to her jaw, then her neck, pressing open-mouthed kisses that left a trail of fire against her skin. "Tell me you hate this," he murmured against her throat. "Tell me to stop." But she couldn't, because she didn't want him to stop, and the way his lips claimed hers again, desperate and urgent, told her he didn't want to stop either. Then, as suddenly as it started, Leo pulled away. The warmth of his body vanished, leaving her breathless, confused, aching. She blinked up at him, her lips still tingling, her heart pounding in her chest. "Leo, this shouldn't have happened." His voice was hoarse, his expression unreadable. A muscle ticked in his jaw, his breathing uneven. But he was already shutting down, already pushing her away. "Forget this," he muttered. "Forget it ever happened." Amara stared at him, hurt, twisting deep inside her, because the way he had kissed her, the way he had held her, it wasn't something you could just forget. But as she watched him turn away, closing himself off like he always did, she realized something. Leo Blackstone was terrified. Not of her, not of the kiss, but of what it meant. And that was the most heartbreaking part of all. The morning after the kiss, Amara woke up feeling different. Her body still hummed from the way Leo's lips had claimed hers, from the way his hands had gripped her waist like he couldn't bear to let go. She should have felt regret. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt alive. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something more between them. Maybe Leo Blackstone wasn't as cold-hearted as he pretended to be. Maybe that kiss had meant something. Maybe she meant something. But she was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. Amara had just stepped into the hallway outside Leo's office, balancing a stack of files in her arms, when she heard it. A voice. Deep, commanding, familiar. His voice. She slowed her steps, the sound pulling her in like a magnet. Leo was on the phone. His door was slightly ajar, giving her a glimpse of his tall, imposing figure as he stood near the window, his back to her. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the moment the words left his lips, her world crumbled. She was just a momentary distraction. I don't mix business with pleasure. Amara froze. Her heart stopped. For a second she couldn't breathe. Had she imagined it? Had she misheard? His voice was clear, sharp, emotionless. The words sliced through her like a blade, cold and merciless. Her fingers trembled around the stack of files. Last night, that kiss, that moment, the way he had held her like she was the only woman in the world. It had meant everything to her. But to him, it was nothing. Just a momentary distraction. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. A soft, bitter laugh almost escaped her lips. God, she was a fool. She had let herself believe that Leo Blackstone, the arrogant, ruthless billionaire who had made her life hell since the moment she walked into his company, could actually care. How stupid, how naive, how pathetic. She felt something inside her shatter. And she knew she couldn't stay here. Not for another second. Amara marched back to her desk, her vision blurred with unshed tears. With trembling hands, she opened her laptop, typed out her resignation letter, and printed it without hesitation. Her mind screamed at her to take a breath, to think it through. But her heart was done thinking. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She wouldn't be some pathetic woman begging for his attention. No, she would walk away with her head held high. She grabbed the paper, stormed into his office, and slammed it onto his desk. Leo turned, startled. His eyes met hers, and for a second, just a second, she saw something flicker in them. Surprise, regret, guilt. "What is this?" he asked, his voice unreadable. "My resignation." Her voice was calm, controlled, but underneath she was barely holding herself together. Leo's jaw tightened. "You're quitting?" "Yes." He stared at her for a long moment, something dark flashing in his gaze. "Because of last night?" Amara let out a hollow laugh. "Last night?" she repeated. "You mean my momentary distraction?" The way his face immediately hardened, Wine told her everything. He knew she had heard him, and he didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation she needed. She stepped back, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Don't worry, Mr. Blackstone. I won't be distracting you anymore." And with that, she walked away. Amara didn't stop until she reached the elevator, her breath ragged, her vision still blurry. The second the doors closed behind her, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. He wasn't worth it. He was never worth it. But then why did it hurt so much? Why did it feel like her heart had been ripped from her chest? As the elevator descended, she made a silent vow. She would forget Leo Blackstone, forget his kiss, forget the way he made her feel, because if she didn't, she would never survive the heartbreak. Leo betrayed her trust, and Amara is not the type of woman to beg for love. Her decision to walk away is powerful, but deep down, both of them are breaking. A new city, a fresh start, a new life. That was what Amara told herself when she packed up her apartment, booked a one-way ticket, and left her in New York City behind. She had chosen Chicago, a city full of life, movement, and distractions, a place where she could bury the past beneath neon lights and busy streets. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't outrun him. The wind was sharp against her skin as she stepped out onto her apartment's small balcony, staring out at the glittering skyline. Chicago was beautiful, vibrant, but it felt hollow. Because the truth was, it wasn't New York she had run away from. It was him. Leo Blackstone, the man who had kissed her like she was his entire world, only to turn around and throw her away like she was nothing. Her fingers clenched around the cup of coffee in her hands, the warmth seeping into her skin as she inhaled deeply, willing herself to forget. But forgetting him, that was impossible. She had been doing fine until the nights came. Because at night, when the world was quiet and the city lights flickered through her window, she remembered. She remembered everything. The way Leo's hands had possessed her, gripping her waist like he never wanted to let go. The way his lips had claimed hers, hungry, desperate, filled with something too raw to be denied. The way her body had melted against his, her heart pounding like a drum, her breath stolen by the sheer intensity of his touch. The way he had whispered her name like a prayer. Amara. A shiver ran down her spine. She squeezed her eyes shut, hating how her body still craved him. Even after everything, even after his betrayal. Damn him. Damn his kiss. Damn the way he made her feel alive. She tried to move on. She went on dates. She let men take her to fancy restaurants, let them pull out her chair, let them look at her with admiration. She smiled, laughed in all the right places, but no one made her feel the way Leo had. No one sent shivers down her spine with a single glance. No one made her pulse race with just a touch. No one looked at her like she was their entire world. Because Leo was the only man who had ever made her feel that way. And now, he was the only man who had ever made her feel completely shattered. One night, after yet another date that left her feeling empty, Amara came home, kicked off her heels, and poured herself a glass of wine. She sat by the window, watching the rain hit the glass, her fingers gripping the stem of the glass too tightly. And for the first time in weeks, tears burned in her eyes. No. Number. She refused to cry over Leo Blackstone, over the man who had called her a momentary distraction, over the man who had kissed her like he needed her, only to pretend she meant nothing. She wouldn't let him have that power over her. She wouldn't break because of him. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and whispered, "I'm done. Done thinking about him, done missing him, done loving him." Because he never loved her. Right? But as she curled into bed that night, staring at the empty space beside her, a painful truth settled deep in her chest. She could lie to herself all she wanted. But her heart still belonged to him, and no matter how far she ran, the ghost of Leo Blackstone would always follow. Years had passed. Amara had built a new life. She had climbed the corporate ladder, made a name for herself, and buried the pain of Leo Blackstone deep inside her heart, where it could never hurt her again. Or so she thought. Because fate, cruel and merciless, was about to bring them face to face again. The air buzzed with wealth and power as Amara stepped into the grand ballroom of the Drash Monarch Hotel. It was a night of luxury, an exclusive gala for Mao, CEOs, investors, and the elite of the elite. A night where men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns whispered deals worth millions over champagne. A night where she belonged now, no longer the struggling assistant who had once been at the mercy of a ruthless CEO. But tonight, she wasn't here for business. Tonight, she was here to remind herself who she had become. The moment she walked in, every head turned. Because Amara Hayes was breathtaking. Her body was wrapped in a silk red dress that hugged every curve, the deep slit revealing long, elegant legs. Her dark curls cascaded down her back, her brown skin glowing under the chandelier lights. Her lips, painted a sinful shade of red, were curved in a confident smile. She was untouchable. And then she saw him. Leo Blackstone. He stood near the bar, one hand in his pocket, the other swirling a glass of whiskey. He looked different. Older, more powerful, more dangerous. His black tuxedo fit him like a second skin, the open collar revealing a glimpse of tanned, sculpted skin. His hair was slightly longer, a little messier, like he had run his fingers through it too many times. But his eyes, those icy blue eyes, were the same, cold, intense, piercing, and they were locked onto her. A chill ran down Amara's spine. Why did he still have this effect on her? Why did her pulse still race when he looked at her like that, like she was the only woman in the world? Number. She refused to let him undo her. Not after all these years. Not after what he had done. With practiced grace, she turned away, heading toward the dance floor, pretending he didn't exist. But before she could take another step, a firm hand wrapped around her wrist. Her breath caught. His touch burned. Slowly, she turned her head, and there he was, standing, so close. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne, dark, woody, intoxicating. His grip was gentle but unyielding. She swallowed, her heart hammering in her chest as his gaze pierced into hers. "I need to talk to you," Leo whispered, his voice rough, like it physically hurt him to say the words. Her body betrayed her. A shiver ran down her spine. Damn him. Damn the way his voice still made her weak. She yanked her wrist away, tilting her chin up. "There's nothing to talk about, Leo." His jaw clenched, and something dark flickered in his eyes. "Amara." "No." She cut him off, her voice sharp, steady. "You lost the right to speak to me a long time ago." His throat bobbed. For a moment he just stood there looking at her like the man drowning, like she was the only thing that could save him. She hated that look, because once upon a time she would have saved him, but not anymore, not after he had broken her. She took a step back, then another. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackstone," she said, her voice laced with finality, and before he could stop her, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving him standing there, eyes full of torment, hands clenched into fists, jaw tight with regret. Because for the first time in his life, Leo Blackstone knew what it felt like to lose. And this time, he wasn't willing to let her go. Leo just saw the woman he betrayed, the woman he never stopped wanting. And now he's realizing she's no longer his to claim. Should I move on to the next chapter where Leo fights to win her back, desperately, passionately, and with everything he has? Let me know. The city sprawled beneath them, vast and full of possibilities. But up here, on the rooftop of the Monarch Hotel, there was nothing but the weight of their past and the crushing tension in the air. Amara tried to push through the crowd, her heart still racing from Leo's touch. She had escaped, or so she thought. But the moment she heard his footsteps behind her, the familiar pull of his presence was like a magnet to her soul. She kept walking, pretending she didn't hear him, pretending she didn't feel the heat of his gaze burning into her back. But then, a hand grasped her wrist again. This time it wasn't gentle, it was firm, urgent, desperate. "Amara, please." She spun around, her pulse quickening as she looked into his eyes. Eyes that were tortured, eyes that were raw with emotion. "Let me go, Leo." But he didn't let go. He pulled her toward the stairwell. And though she tried to fight it, the strength in his grip was too much. She tried to pull away. She tried to push him off, but he didn't budge. They reached the rooftop, and Leo threw open the door, dragging her into the cool night air. The wind whipped around them, but all she could feel was the pounding of her heart and the steady pressure of his hand around her wrist. She tried to jerk away from him, but he pulled her toward him. His voice, now low and trembling, was thick with frustration. "Amara, please, just listen to me. I need you to hear me out." She took a deep breath, shaking her head. "You've had your chance, Leo. You lost it when you—" Her words were cut off, because in the next instant, his lips crashed onto hers. It was nothing like the kiss they shared that night in the office. This one wasn't just hungry, it wasn't just fiery. This kiss was desperate. It was aching, raw, like a man who had been drowning and was now gasping for air. His hands gripped her face like he was terrified she would slip away, like he couldn't bear the thought of losing her again. His lips moved against hers with a frenzied urgency. Each kiss a plea, a confession, a desperate promise. Amara's knees buckled under the force of it. Her heart fluttered, then beat in wild, uncontrollable rhythms. This was a kiss that mattered, that reached into the deepest corners of her soul, stirring up feelings she thought she had buried. But she couldn't let him get away with it so easily. When he pulled back, his chest heaving, his breath ragged against her lips, she looked up at him, her eyes wide, her heart still racing. His eyes were filled with tears. something broken and vulnerable in them that she had never seen before. He stepped back slightly, his hand still holding on to her like he was afraid she would disappear. "I never stopped loving you," Leo whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own regret. Amara's breath hitched, her chest ached with the intensity of his words, but she couldn't let herself believe them. He had hurt her. He had used her. And now he was back, too late, professing his love as if it could undo the damage he'd done. She tried to hold her ground, her mind screaming at her to stay strong, to not fall for his words, to not let him see how much his confession had stirred something deep inside her. "You think that fixes everything, Leo?" she said, her voice trembling with the force of everything she had kept buried. "You think you can just kiss me and say those words, and it makes everything okay?" Leo's face twisted in agony. "I never meant to hurt you, Amara. I never wanted to lose you." Her chest tightened. God, how she wanted to believe him. But she had been broken by him. She couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable again. Amara pulled away from him, putting distance between them. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she tried to fight the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. "You lost me, Leo." Her words cut through the air, each one sharper than the last. "You lost me when you treated me like I was nothing, when you lied to me, when you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Leo's expression was one of absolute torment, his lips trembling as he reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "Number. You don't get to come back into my life just because it's convenient for you now. You don't get to kiss me and make everything better." Leo's hand dropped. He looked at her like she had broken him, like she had shattered the last piece of his heart. For a moment, they stood there in the quiet. The only sound the howling wind between them, and then, "Please," Leo whispered, his voice raw, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't name. "Don't walk away from me again." But Amara couldn't do it. She couldn't let him in again, not so easily. "I don't trust you anymore, Leo," she said softly, her voice shaking but firm. "I don't trust you." And for the first time, Amara saw it. The depth of his pain. He had lost her, but in that loss, he had found something he never wanted to face. He had always loved her. And now, with her walking away, Leo understood, too late, just how much he had taken her for granted. Too late. The silence between them felt unbearable. Amara stood there, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her eyes avoiding Leo's, afraid that if she looked at him too long, she might just break. Leo watched her, standing there like a man lost, desperate, his heart heavy with regret. The wind still whipped around them, but the chill of the night felt nothing compared to the cold emptiness that settled between them. Finally, Leo stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was testing whether or not she would pull away. His voice was hoarse, carrying the weight of years of guilt and heartache. "Amara, please, listen to me. The words you overheard, the ones that shattered you, I never meant them." Her head snapped up at that. Her pulse quickened. She had heard him. She had heard him say those words. She had heard him call her a momentary distraction, and that nothing was worth mixing business with pleasure. She had heard his cold dismissal of her, and it had cut her deep. Amara took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper as she faced him. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Leo. Those words, they destroyed me. I thought I meant something to you, but you treated me like I was nothing." His chest tightened at the pain in her voice. "Amara, you mean everything to me. You always have. But I was trying to protect you." She blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Protect me," she repeated, shaking her head. "From what?" Leo stepped closer, his eyes wide with desperation, as if every word he spoke was his last chance to make her understand. "From them," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the enemies I've made, from the people who would have used you to get to me. They knew how much I cared about you, Amara. I thought if they saw me with you, they would hurt you. I didn't want you to be a target. I was trying to protect you from all the danger I carry with me." Amara's heart stuttered in her chest. The revelation hit her like a ton of bricks, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. You lied to me to protect me?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and hurt. "Yes, I did. But in doing so, I hurt you. And I am so sorry for that." Amara's mind raced, trying to reconcile the Leo standing before her with the Leo she had once known, the man who kissed her with hunger, who made her feel like she was the most important person in his world. But now, there was no trace of that confident, cocky CEO. The man before her was vulnerable, shaking with regret. "I tried to push you away, to let you go, but it was impossible." Leo continued, his voice barely audible. "I never stopped loving you, Amara, and I couldn't stand the thought of you being hurt because of me." The sincerity in his words struck her deeply, but Amara's heart was still a battlefield, torn between the love she had once felt for him and the betrayal that still burned like a fresh wound. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything had been a misunderstanding, that the love they shared could somehow survive all the damage. But there were so many broken pieces. Amara closed her eyes, feeling the pain of everything she had been through with him, all the nights spent crying over his lies, all the moments when she thought, maybe it had all been a dream. "You don't understand, Leo," she said, her voice shaky. "I've been trying to forget you for so long, trying to move on from the pain, from the betrayal, and now you're asking me to just trust you again." She could feel her tears threatening to fall. She refused to let him see her break down. "Not again." Leo's hands clenched at his sides, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't even know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. I can't take back the past, Amara, but I will spend every day proving to you that you mean the world to me." Amara felt her heart clench. She saw the rawness in his eyes, the sincerity, the hope that was left in him. He was laying himself bare in front of her, his brokenness clear. But was it enough? Could she really trust him again after everything? For so long she had built walls around herself to protect her heart, and now, in this moment, Leo was asking her to tear them down, to let him in again. But the fear was still there, fear of being hurt again, fear of giving her heart to someone who had once broken it. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Amara whispered, the words slicing through the air. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk it." Leo's eyes softened, his heart aching as he nodded. "I'll wait for you. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait for you to trust me again. I'll never give up on us." For a long moment they just stood there, the weight of the world pressing down on them, as the city lights shimmered below them like stars in a distant sky. Amara felt the pull between them, felt the undeniable connection, the same connection that had once made her believe they were meant to be. But now, it was her choice. Amara stood in the dim hallway, her heart racing in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder, making sure no one saw her slip away. She had left the gala hours ago, her mind still swirling with Leo's words, his confession, the rawness in his eyes. She had tried to fight it, to shut him out, but something deep inside her refused to let go of the love that still burned so fiercely. That night, they met again. In the shadows of the hotel's garden, hidden from the world, they found each other. The moonlight cast a soft glow over Amara's face as she stepped into Leo's arms, and for a brief, precious moment, the rest of the world faded away. The tension between them was undeniable, thick in the air like an electric charge. "I can't stop thinking about you," Leo whispered, his voice low and filled with longing. He pulled her close, his hands gentle but possessive on her waist. His lips brushed against her ear as he added, "Amara, I need you. Please don't push me away again." Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but the words caught, tangled in the rawness of the moment. His hands, the same hands that had once hurt her, now held her like she was the most fragile thing in the world. She had every reason to push him away, to walk away from the pain, but the ache for him, the need, was too powerful. "I shouldn't," she whispered. But even as she said it, her body pressed closer to his. Leo leaned down, capturing her lips with his in a kiss that was not just about desire. It was about the years of longing, the years of silent suffering, the years of waiting. His kiss was deep, urgent, as if he feared that if he stopped, she might vanish forever. The stolen moments between them became a drug, each one more addictive than the last. They met in hidden corners of the city, places where no one could find them. They spoke little, letting their bodies say what their hearts refused to. Each kiss felt like a confession, each touch a promise that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. One night, in the privacy of his penthouse, they were alone. The world outside didn't matter anymore. It was just the two of them in the silence, their gazes locked. Leo's eyes were dark, full of passion and vulnerability, as if he could see into her soul, and she could see into his. "Tell me what you need, Amara," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "Tell me what I can do to make this right." Her hands trembled as she reached for him, pulling him closer. She didn't need words anymore. Her body told him everything he needed to know, everything she needed him to understand. There was no rushing this time, no angry passion, no desperation. This was slower, deeper. As Leo kissed her, his lips worshipping hers with the same intensity as a man who had come to terms with the hurt he caused, he whispered between kisses, "I'm so sorry, Amara, for everything. I was selfish. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only hurting you." Her hands, trembling with the weight of his words, slid up to his face, cupping his jaw as if she could hold his apology in her palms and keep it safe. "I'm not perfect either," she whispered back, her voice barely a breath. "But I want to try. I want to trust you, Leo. I want to believe in us again." His eyes softened, and in that moment, she knew. He wasn't just apologizing with words. He was surrendering. He was giving her his heart, broken and raw, but ready to love her fully and completely. They moved toward the bed slowly, as if they were both afraid of rushing the moment. Every kiss, every touch, was laden with the unspoken promises of a love that had never fully gone away. When they finally came together, it wasn't just physical, it was spiritual and emotional, a connection that went beyond skin. Their love had always been a storm, but tonight it was a hurricane, consuming, intense, and impossible to escape. Leo worshipped her with his hands, his lips, his soul, and Amara surrendered to him. To them, he kissed every inch of her body as if he could make up for every moment lost. He kissed her with reverence, with that devotion, not just as a lover, but as someone who had waited years for this moment. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, the words heavy with the weight of everything he had kept inside. I've always loved you." And when their bodies finally joined, it wasn't just a release, it was a promise. It was their way of telling each other that they were finally whole again. In that moment, there was no more pain, no more betrayal, just the two of them, finally coming together as they were meant to. The night was long, and as the hours passed, their passion only grew. Every touch was electric, every kiss a reminder of what they had once shared and what they could build again. Amara's heart, though still guarded, began to soften under the weight of Leo's love. When they finally collapsed together, breathless, entangled in the sheets, Leo held her close, his lips brushing against her hair. "I don't deserve you, Amara," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you deserve." Her heart swelled with emotion as she rested her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the outline of his jaw. "You've already proven it, Leo," she whispered. "You're here, and that's all I need." Should I continue with the next chapter where Leo's devotion is tested again, but this time he's ready to fight for their love? Amara stood at the window, gazing out at the city lights below. The glow of the skyline felt like a dream, distant and intangible, and in this moment she felt as though she were living in someone else's story. The quiet hum of the city contrasted sharply with the storm raging in her heart. It had been weeks since she had allowed herself to fully trust Leo again, weeks since they had rekindled the fire between them. They had shared stolen moments, passionate nights, and whispered promises that nothing could tear them apart. She had believed, truly believed, that their love could overcome anything. But she hadn't accounted for the darkness that still clung to him, the enemies, the threats, the world of danger that came with loving a man like Leo. And now it had found them. The phone call came early one morning. Leo had been distant all night, his mind preoccupied with something he couldn't share. He'd been acting strange, looking over his shoulder constantly, as if he was expecting someone, to appear out of nowhere. And then, just like that, it happened. Amara was in the kitchen when she heard Leo's voice. A sharp command on the phone, his words clipped, urgent. "I'll do whatever it takes. You won't touch her. You have my word." The conversation was brief, but the weight of it hung in the air like a fog. Amara's heart raced as she walked toward him, needing to know what was going on, needing to hear it from his lips. "Leo," she called out softly, her voice trembling. Leo turned, his face pale, eyes wide with something she had never seen before, fear, a fear so raw, so unguarded, it sent a shiver through her bones. "Amara." His voice was hoarse, like he was choking on something he couldn't swallow. "You need to leave, now." Her breath caught in her throat. "What? What are you talking about?" Leo ran a hand through his hair, pacing in the living room, his steps sharp and erratic. He didn't look at her. "They're after you, Amara. They won't stop until they have you. I can't protect you anymore." Amara's heart twisted painfully in her chest, the panic beginning to rise as she closed the distance between them. "Who's after me, Leo? What are you talking about?" His eyes met hers then, but there was nothing but pain in his gaze. "My enemies, Amara. People who will do anything to get to me. They've found out about you. You're not safe here. I can't let them use you against me. Please, you have to leave." Amara's world tilted on its axis, the fear in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. She could see it all now. He wasn't asking her to leave for his sake, but for hers. But what Leo was asking of her was more than she could bear. He was asking her to walk away again, to leave him behind, to let him sacrifice their love for her safety. "I won't leave you," Amara said fiercely, her chest tight with emotion. She stepped closer to him, reaching for his hand, but he pulled away, his face contorting in pain. "You don't understand. This is the only way I can keep you safe. I've put you in danger just by being with you. If you stay, they'll use you to hurt me. I won't let that happen." Her throat tightened as tears welled up in her eyes. "Leo, I'm not afraid. I can handle it. We can handle it together." She cried, but Leo's expression remained firm, his jaw clenched in determination. "No, Amara, I won't risk it. You don't deserve this life. You deserve better than a man who drags you into the darkness with him. I won't let you be a pawn in their game. Please, don't make this harder than it already is." Amara's heart shattered at the finality in his voice. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Leo wasn't just trying to protect her, he was letting her go, because he truly believed that the only way to keep her safe was to cut ties with her once and for all. "You're asking me to leave, to forget you," Amara whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything we've been through, Leo, you really want me to walk away and never look back?" Leo's eyes closed, the pain in them too much for him to bear. "I'm doing this for you, Amara. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I'd rather live in torment for the rest of my life than see you hurt because of me." She stepped back, her body trembling as the weight of his words crushed her. "Then you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to leave you. Not now, not after everything," she whispered, the tears streaming down her face. Her words hit him harder than anything else. He reached for her, but she stepped away, her heart breaking with every inch of space between them. "I love you more than anything, Amara. You're everything to me." Leo choked out, but she shook her head, stepping out of his reach. She had wanted so badly to believe in their love, to think that maybe, just maybe, their story would have a happy ending. But this was a love that wasn't meant to be, not now, not with the dangers Leo carried with him. "Goodbye, Leo," Amara said, her voice trembling. She turned, not waiting for him to stop her, not wanting to hear anything else he had to say. She was leaving, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. And as she walked away, her heart breaking with every step, she realized the truth of his words. He was willing to sacrifice everything for her safety, even the love they shared. Would you like to continue with the next chapter, where Leo fights to prove his love against all odds, or would you prefer a different twist to the ending? Amara sat in the dimly lit office, the faint glow of her phone screen casting shadows across her face. She had left Leo. She had walked away from everything they had fought for. But now, after weeks of silence and pain, something inside her had shifted. No more tears, no more hiding. If Leo thought he could sacrifice their love without a fight, he was wrong. Amara knew better than anyone that love was not a passive thing. It was an action, a choice to stand up, to fight for what mattered, to face even the darkest of times head on. And that was exactly what she was going to do. She stood up, taking a deep breath as the decision solidified in her heart. She wasn't the type of woman to be told what she could or couldn't do. If Leo believed he was protecting her by pushing her away, she would show him just how wrong he was. She wasn't weak. She didn't need saving. "I'll expose them. I'll show the world the truth." The words echoed in her mind like a battle cry. She had no idea how, but she would find a way to bring Leo's enemies to justice, starting with the man who had tried to ruin him. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to fight. The following days felt like a whirlwind of action. Amara contacted a few trusted allies she had made over the years, journalists, lawyers, and investigators, people who knew how to navigate the murky waters of corporate corruption. She had never been so determined, so filled with purpose. When the day finally arrived, she was ready. Clad in a sharp black suit that made her look both fierce and elegant, Amara walked into the conference room, where Leo and his team were meeting with the enemies who had been threatening their lives. She had gathered every shred of evidence, every damning piece of information, and now she was going to lay it all out. The moment she stepped into the room, the cold, calculating faces of Leo's enemies twisted in surprise. Leo stood at the head of the table, his expression hard, unreadable. His eyes locked on hers, a flicker of something unreadable in them. "Amara? What are you doing here?" His voice was low, a mix of confusion and concern. "I'm here to help you, to stop this madness," Amara replied, her voice unwavering. She turned to face the group of men who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, her gaze unwavering. "You've made a mistake. I'm not just some woman you can push aside. I'm here to take you down." There was a moment of stunned silence as the enemies looked between each other, but it was clear that Amara was in control now. The power had shifted. The calm confidence in her voice, the fire in her eyes. It left them with no choice but to listen. Amara began revealing everything, the shady business deals, the threats, the manipulation. She didn't mince words or shy away from the truth. As the walls of corruption began to crumble, Leo's eyes softened with a mixture of awe and relief. He had never seen her so fierce, so unstoppable. This is incredible," Leo whispered, his gaze fixed on her as she effortlessly destroyed the lies that had haunted them both. Amara didn't look at him. She didn't need his validation. She wasn't doing this for him. She was doing this for herself, for the woman she had become. But a small part of her heart couldn't help but notice the way Leo's eyes were glued to her, the pride in his expression. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Amara presented the incriminating documents that proved the mastermind behind the corruption was one of Leo's closest business partners. The room went silent, the tension palpable. "This is it," Amara said, turning to Leo. "This is how we win, together." Leo stared at her, his chest tight with emotion. He had watched her fight, watched her face down the enemy with courage and strength, and in that moment, something inside him broke. The woman who had walked into his life so unexpectedly, so strong, so independent, was the same woman who was standing by him now, fighting for their future, for their love. As the enemies were taken into custody and the chaos that had threatened their lives slowly died down, Leo approached Amara. He had seen her as the woman he loved before, but now he saw her as his equal, his partner in every sense of the word. She had proven herself to be his rock, his salvation, and he would never let her go again. "Amara," Leo whispered, his voice low and full of emotion. He stepped closer to her, his hands trembling as he reached for her. "I don't deserve you. You're everything I never knew I needed." Amara's heart fluttered at his words, the raw sincerity in his eyes. She had fought for their love, and now, as the battle faded into the past, she realized that it had all been worth it. They were stronger than they had ever been before. "You've always deserved me, Leo," she replied softly, her hands resting gently against his chest. "You just needed to believe it. And now we can move forward, together." Leo's hands cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek, and as his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, Amara knew in that moment that nothing could tear them apart again. As the night stretched on, Leo held Amara close, his heart filled with the certainty that she was the one he wanted for the rest of his life. She wasn't just the woman he loved, she was the woman he wanted forever. "Amara," Leo said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I've made mistakes, but I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that I love you. I'll fight for us, always." Tears filled Amara's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of the love that had finally overcome every obstacle. "I love you too, Leo, and I'll fight with you, forever." They kissed again, deeply, passionately, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together, side by side. Would you like to proceed with the final chapter of their journey, or would you prefer to explore another twist in their story? The city was alive with lights, each shining down like a star, illuminating the night sky as Amara stepped onto the rooftop of Leo's penthouse. She had spent so many nights on this rooftop, looking out at the world below, wondering where her life was headed. But tonight felt different. Amara's heart raced as she turned around to face Leo. He stood by the railing, the cool breeze ruffling his dark hair, his eyes filled with a tenderness she had never seen before. His usual confident, collected demeanor was replaced with something raw, vulnerable. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at her as the CEO of Blackstone Enterprises. He was looking at her as the woman who had captured his heart, the woman who had fought beside him, loved him, and shown him what it truly meant to feel. "Leo?" Amara's voice trembled slightly, her pulse quickening. She had no idea what was coming. Leo took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. The world seemed to fade away as he slowly walked toward her, his every movement deliberate, as if he was savoring each second of the moment. "Amara," he whispered, his voice hushed with emotion. "You are the woman who has changed my life. You've made me a better man. I was lost before I met you, and now I can't imagine living without you." Amara's heart swelled at his words, but there was still an edge of uncertainty in her mind. Could it really be true? Had all the pain, all the scars they'd both endured, led them to this moment? Before she could speak, Leo dropped to one knee. Amara gasped, her eyes widening in shock as he knelt before her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the diamond ring nestled inside. It was beautiful, beyond anything she could have imagined. "Amara Hayes," Leo said, his voice breaking. "You are the love of my life. You've made me believe in love again, and you've made me realize that no matter what comes, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you be my wife?" His words echoed in her ears, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Amara's chest tightened with emotion as tears welled up in her eyes. This was everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. This was not just a proposal. This was a declaration of everything they had overcome, everything they had fought for. Leo's blue eyes locked onto hers, full of love and sincerity. He was vulnerable in a way she had never seen before, completely open, with no walls between them. The man who had once pushed her away, who had guarded his heart with icy walls, was now on his knee, offering her everything. "Leo." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she couldn't stop the tears from spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, yes, I will be your wife. I love you." She could barely get the words out through the overwhelming rush of emotions, but the instant they left her lips, Leo stood up, pulling her into his arms, crushing her against him in a kiss that held years of longing, regret, and love. The kiss was slow and deliberate, as if neither of them wanted to let go. It was as if the entire world had melted away, and there was only the two of them in that moment. No past, no future, just now. Leo's lips were gentle on hers, but there was an undeniable urgency behind the kiss, a need that had been building for years. He kissed her as though she was his salvation, as though the kiss itself was a promise of forever. "I love you," Leo whispered against her lips. "I love you more than words can say, Amara." Tears still streamed down Amara's cheeks, but they were no longer tears of sadness or confusion. They were tears of joy, of relief, and of pure, unfiltered love. She pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, feeling every inch of him as though this moment would last forever. Weeks later, Amara and Leo stood at the altar, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. The church was filled with the soft scent of roses and lilies, and the soft hum of an orchestra playing their favorite song in the background. Amara's dress was a vision of elegance, silk and lace, with intricate beadwork that sparkled under the light. Her hair was pulled back in soft waves, her makeup soft and natural, but her smile was radiant, brighter than any diamond. She had never felt more beautiful, not because of the dress, but because of the love that radiated from her. Leo stood by her side, his tuxedo sharp, his hair slightly tousled from the wind. He couldn't take his eyes off her, the woman who had become his everything. "You look incredible," Leo whispered as he squeezed her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never felt more alive," Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is real. This is everything we fought for." The vows they exchanged were simple but powerful, a reflection of the deep connection they shared. They spoke of love, of loyalty, of never giving up, no matter what life threw at them. Leo promised to stand by Amara's side through every challenge, to protect her, to cherish her always. Amara promised to love him with all her heart, to never let go, to be the partner he deserved. And when the officiant declared them husband and wife, Leo kissed her again, slow, deep, and full of promise. The kiss was a seal, a promise of forever. As they stood there hand in hand, surrounded by their closest friends and family, Amara knew that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. Their love had been tested, torn apart and rebuilt, but now, with their future ahead of them, nothing could tear them apart. They had fought for each other, fought for the love that had been stronger than any obstacle, any doubt. They were finally home. Together, forever. Leo whispered, pressing his forehead to hers as they stood before their loved ones. Amara smiled through her tears, knowing without a doubt that their love would always be worth fighting for. Together, forever. And as they kissed one more time beneath the setting sun and the soft glow of the moon, Amara knew that their love story, this love story, would last for all eternity.